You are listening to the Final Say Radio Show, a Rappaport Media production, with your host Brett Rappaport and co-host John Rappaport.
We have joining us right now Jeffrey H. Anderson is the Executive Director of 2017 Project, and he's also a contributor to the Weekly Standard, and he has an article out over the last few days covering the issue of now we're going to have deficits. The CBO had scored, I believe it was back in 2012, that there would be a savings over a 10-year period. It's now projected to be a deficit of almost $200 billion. And Jeff, welcome to the Final Say Radio Show with Brett and John. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be on.
Well, I'm not surprised the least bit. In fact, I wouldn't be shocked if that 200, the 180 or whatever billion-dollar deficit over 10 years isn't much larger than that, because I think that this bill is ultimately going to be a fail, and really has been. But I think it'll be worse over time. But I think it's a great article. It's a good, timely piece, and I'm sure you have something to add to that.
Sure. I think I agree with you. I think Obamacare, in the end, is if it's allowed to stay in existence, will explode deficits. I think it's clearly a massive new entitlement program. The CBO now says, the Congressional Budget Office now says it'll cost about $2 trillion over 10 years. Of course, at the time it was passed, we were told it would cost less than $1 trillion. So that's more than doubled since the time of the Senate vote way back in 2009. And as you noted, the CBO had originally said Obamacare would actually not increase the deficit somehow, but would cause there to be something of a surplus, which the American people have certainly never believed. Poll after poll has shown that Americans don't buy that. And now the Senate Budget Committee staff has taken some of the CBO projections of various parts of Obamacare and its effect on things like labor markets, like on the likelihood of people working, and has concluded that based on those CBO projections, it now looks like Obamacare would in fact increase the deficit, even based off these CBO projections. And to be clear, the CBO has not scored this matter now for more than 2 years, but the Senate Budget Committee staff is using the CBO's own projections of various things and piecing this together.
Yeah, and that's a great point. And I would add something that's even more troubling to me, the fact that they can't really audit the cost involved with a lot of these various parts that make up the Affordable Care Act. And, it's troubling to me that we can't really put a definitive number, even close, how many people have signed up, how many people are paying for their coverage, how many people are getting tax credits, we don't really have these answers because they didn't set up something to properly track this. And, of course, how can we expect them to when they can't even build the website for, think of all the private companies that are now some of the biggest companies in existence who built themselves for much less money that we've already spent on something that hardly works.
Yeah, I think they may be tracking it, but they're certainly not sharing the information with the American people. I think the administration may know a lot more than they're letting on. But yeah, they're keeping it a real mystery how many net people have actually gotten insurance. I mean, because you have to look at both sides. How many people are now on Medicaid because of Obamacare or got an Obamacare compliant policy, but also the number of people who got dumped off their old policies. Again, to go back to the CBO scoring, at the time of passage, at the time the Democrats passed Obamacare over unanimous Republican opposition, the CBO said that by now there'd be about 20 million newly insured people net, even counting the people who lost it. They said 19 million. And at this point, it looks like even allies of Obamacare are claiming that it's barely hit half that mark.
Yeah, that's another good point. I would argue that the administration and those people who are in favor of this have always been looking for a single-payer system, one complete healthcare system controlled by the government in the first place. But, in the process of trying to achieve their goal, they've broken large parts of it. I'll give you an example. I know it doesn't have to do with the deficit, but it's a different type of deficit. We have a lot of people who were doctors who are retiring early, and you have a lot of younger people who are going through the college process, who are trying to figure out what they want to do with their careers, and they're reevaluating possibly becoming a doctor to do something else as a result of the direction that this country chose in healthcare. And I can't blame them, but it's going to be a deficit in the availability of doctors and other healthcare workers in the future.
Yeah, I two things about that. One, I'm not so sure I'd agree that it's the direction the country chose. I think clearly Obamacare was Obamacare was passed. I think this is actually going to be the second Obamacare election. 2010 was a remarkable rebuke. The last time the Democrats had lost 63 or more seats, which is what they lost in the House in 2010, right after they passed Obamacare, at the same time that they lost the majority. The last time that happened was in the 1800s. So that was a pretty amazing rebuke that the press never really reported as being as much of one as it was. And then, of course, we had a sort of hiatus from Obamacare in 2012 because Mitt Romney was sort of the last guy who wanted to talk about Obamacare. And then now in 2014, I think you see Obamacare now back on center stage, and I think this is going to be another ugly election for the Democrats, and I think they're going to lose control of the Senate.
Well, Jeff, I hope you're right, and without getting off in the Romney weeds, it was such a classic mistake when arguably one of the single things you can go after the president on was health care, and the guy you put in is a Republican who tried to do the same thing at a state level and then spent all his time trying to explain, no, it's different. If we saw how well that worked out in the final election.
Yeah. He was like tailor-made to not make the argument against Obamacare.
Yeah, exactly. I want to take this in a slightly different direction. As an innovator and an entrepreneur, one of the big problems that I have with this is bureaucracies never die. And when this becomes an entrenched political mechanism, I believe we've already seen this becomes an indoctrination machine as opposed to an innovation machine. And I think not only will this have huge ramifications on the cost, but you take out the market forces that have a tendency to self-correct. We thought for a few years, remember how cool it was when your box showed up and you got a computer that was, had the print of a cow on it, right? And everybody thought, these gateway computers and everything was cool, and Dells were shipped. Well, all of a sudden, those are gone, and now it's all about my Samsung and my Apple smartphone. Technology, when left up to the innovators, will continue to rapidly deliver far more value at far lower cost. Government becomes, well, again, I'll use the term political entrenchment, and it never dies and it never goes away. And I would argue that the performance is much slower than the private markets. Now, when we're talking about the fact that this is our bodies, this is our life and death, I think there's a huge economic component to that. I don't know that we can effectively measure it, but anybody who understands business knows it's there, and it's probably immeasurable in the wrong direction.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's and I think this is a bureaucracy that needs to go away, a program that needs to go away. There's absolutely no reason why. The American people never wanted this, and it's been remarkable how consistent the polling has been that Americans continue to detest Obamacare. And so I think the conservatives just need to be committed to getting rid of it. It's an extremely winnable battle. It's a battle that should be won. And I think the key is to put out a conservative alternative. That's all. I think that's really all the American people are waiting for, and that's something we've actually been very involved in here at the 2017 Project. We've put out a conservative alternative to Obamacare that any of your listeners can see on our website if they would like at 2017project.org. And I think that's the real key. There's no reason why Obamacare cannot be and should not be repealed and replaced with real, genuine reform.
What are your concerns about the IRS involvement here and the fact that the IRS, the one place where you're guilty until proven innocent, suddenly becomes an intermediary and an overlord for, again, our body and our health, and the ability to actually rip money kicking and screaming out of our accounts to pay for something that we don't necessarily want?
Well, I think it's definitely a concern. I mean, the IRS, Obamacare is so based on your income, and so it opens this whole new avenue for the IRS to constantly be checking everyone's income. Is it the same this year as it was last year? Has something changed? It's a much more active role for the IRS. I mean, sadly, the Obamacare is so bad that I'd put that down the list of concerns. But even that is a significant one, and I think that any sort of genuine conservative alternative should not have such a role for the IRS, because it shouldn't have income-based assistance. You know, we shouldn't be playing this income redistribution game.
Jeffrey, I completely agree with you. And by trade, I'm an accountant, and I still do some accounting work. And in fact, I just suffered through the final extension period doing a few returns. And I'll tell you that, you know, we're supposed to be a system that treats everybody the same, and the tax code doesn't in the least bit. Now, of course, everybody's subject to the same code, but when you actually look at how one taxpayer is treated to another, it's absolutely true that you have, 47, 48% of the population that won't pay any tax, and then you have, a handful of people who pay an extraordinary amount, and then everybody, in between there. But when you look at any of these bills, what happens is when you transfer the power to the IRS, which operates differently than our Constitution does, if you think about this, because you're actually guilty until you prove your innocence. And when you start involving, think about this. We went from a doctor-patient relationship and, having decisions and open markets to trying to move to a system where it's no longer about you. It's about what you're told you could do and what you could pay for it. And by the way, the IRS is in charge. That is as scary as it could be.
No, it's true. And, the government, the federal government's created a problem with our healthcare system for a long, long time with exactly what you're talking about, the inequality in the tax code. Going all the way back to World War II, they gave a preference to employer-provided health insurance, where if you get insurance through your employer, you get a tax break, and if you go buy it on your own, you don't. And despite all of its extraordinary expense and its intrusions upon Americans' liberty, Obamacare didn't even fix that problem. You still have millions upon millions of middle-class Americans who don't get any sort of tax break for buying insurance on their own. And that's the central thing that the 2017 project, Alternative to Obamacare, would address. And would give everybody, regardless of income, a tax credit to be able to buy insurance on their own in the open market.
Yeah, that's good, and we're certainly going to check out the 2017 project and look into some of the ideas you have there. But I'll bring up two more points. You talk about deficits. When the president was trying to sell his plan, and that's basically, I've never seen somebody have to try to sell something so hard, and as you said, still have 65% of the country saying no. But he told us every family would save approximately $2,500, and I'd argue that that's probably what we've seen a rise per family, if not more. And in fact, it seems to me it's like when you force people into getting coverage for things that don't even apply to their bodies. I'm sorry, that's not. I don't need to have, that's like a woman's realm. I don't need to, have coverage for, having children and this and that and blah blah blah. If you're an individual seeking a policy, there's like, I just need, if I break my leg and go to the hospital, I need to be covered for something catastrophic, or I come down with cancer. I could pay my $50 to go visit my doctor. And, in exchange for all the wonderful things, we now, everybody has these massive bills, which are like, 2 and 3 times a car payment, and people have enough time with their car payments. Yeah,
it's, this is just typical. The government, the politicians thinking they know best. Try to funnel as much power and money to Washington D.C. as you can, and then decree everything for everyone else. And as you said, there are certainly plenty of men who don't need maternity coverage. There are certainly plenty of women who don't need maternity coverage. If you're a 60-year-old woman, or if you're a nun, why do you need maternity coverage? And if and everybody has to get pediatric dental care. It's crazy. It's so poorly conceived. It's wrong on practically every point. It's 2,700 pages of moving us in the wrong direction on everything. And the only way to get this back into a rightful place is to repeal it, get rid of it, and get a nice start from with a nice clean blank slate, and then replace it with the sort of real reform that Americans were clamoring for back before this thing was passed.
Yeah. Jeff, we've spoken with numerous members of Congress, some of which are doctors who've been working on, they've all proposed various bills from time to time. But do you have any particular members that you've been working on with this project or speaking with and trying to get them behind some of the ideas that you guys are promoting?
Yeah, I mean, we've spoken to a lot of different members, both on the House and Senate side, about and their staffs about the 2017 Project Alternative, and I think there's a lot of interest there. And just recently in Virginia, Ed Gillespie embraced the 2017 Project Alternative and is now running on that against Mark Warner, who, of course, Warner was one of the senators who cast one of the votes without which Obamacare couldn't have passed.
Yeah, absolutely. One last thing. When this whole bill was still in the Senate, if you recall, for it to even come to the floor for a vote, there were a couple senators up in Maine, and then one particular one who unfortunately helped was Scott Brown. It's a shame that it even came to a vote because it could have been prevented from the beginning, and unfortunately that wasn't the case.
Right.
And
there's been a lot of. I'm sure your listeners can think back to all the shady dealings at the time of passage with the Cornhusker kickback and the Louisiana Purchase and Gatorade and all that. I mean, and it's just been more of the same. I mean, the degree of lawlessness on the part of the administration of late, refusing to execute the law that he spearheaded and signed. I mean, it's dangerous stuff. It's not only an extraordinary, unprecedented consolidation of power and money and in the hands of the federal government, but there's a degree of lawlessness that is very much a threat to our constitutional structure.
Yeah, absolutely agree with you 100%. Anyway, Jeffrey, it's been a pleasure speaking with you, and we thank you so much for joining us. And again, could you share the website for the 2017 project and anything else you're working on for that matter?
Yeah, the 2017 project website would be where you could find most of the stuff we've been working on. It's just 2017project.org.com. We've got everything that's close to that, so you can get there with anything close to that address. And I hope people will take a look, especially at our Obamacare alternative. Okay.
Do you have a Twitter handle?
I do not, actually. I'm still kind of in the Stone Ages on that one.
You're too busy working on common sense legislation. Anyway, again, Jeff, thank you so much. We look forward to speaking again in the future.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay. Take care.